Charlotte is one of America's fastest growing cities. More than 150 new residents arrive every day. From the start, the Belk College of Business has been part of Charlotte's economic engine. Our location isn't just an address, it's an advantage. We are the city's only top-tier research business school with the scale and commitment to shape finance, energy, real estate, and innovation. Our work connects directly to the people and industries growing one of the nation's most dynamic economies. Our faculty deliver nationally recognized research with real-world impact. Banking and finance, pioneering practical research that guides financial services and investment decisions. Real estate and housing, helping companies tackle the region's urgent need for affordable housing. Business risk and opportunity, guiding organizations through changing economic environments, supply chain disruptions, and insurance challenges. Talent development, creating science-based strategies to recruit, train, and keep top performers. Entrepreneurship, equipping innovators to launch and grow ventures in a competitive market. Technology and AI, showing businesses how to use AI, business intelligence, and other emerging tools to compete and win. Belk College Research leads in the academic setting and beyond. It informs strategy in the boardrooms. It influences public policy. It produces measurable results in the marketplace. In Charlotte, our classroom is the city. Our partners are the industries driving its growth. And our graduates leave with a competitive edge you can't find anywhere else. Of the 3 top 100 public research universities in North Carolina, only one powers its fastest growing city. The difference is Charlotte.
Good morning and welcome. Hope everybody's having a great day. I'm Dr. Richard Buttermer. I'm the Dean of the Belk College of Business here at UNC Charlotte, and welcome to the North Carolina Economic Forecast. It's great to connect with the business community, our alumni, students, and our students in person, as well as the several hundred people that we know are online watching right now. As Charlotte's top-tier business school, the Belk College is leading business innovation through research. We leverage practical, youth-inspired research and develop talent to inspire innovation, stimulate economic growth, and shape organizational practices and performance. Today's presentation is evidence of the impact that the Belk College and our faculty are having on the Charlotte region and beyond. Before we begin our presentation, I'd like to welcome Lauren Ansley for a word from the sponsor for today's presentation, which is UNC Charlotte School of Professional Studies. Lauren?
Hello. Hi. How are we doing? Okay. So who here is attending the North Carolina Economic Forecast event for the first time? Okay, probably lots of people online as well. Well, it's my first time too. Very excited to hear an update and very excited for this opportunity. So my name is Lauren Ansley. I am the program director with UNC Charlotte's Corporate Training and Executive Education, and I need you to do me a quick favor. I bet we're going to hear some very interesting statistics about North Carolina's economy today, and I've got some impressive numbers to share with you too. So when I say a number, I want you to be really impressed, and I want you to turn to your neighbor. I want you to go, wow. Okay? Let's practice. Corporate Training and Executive Education offers over 150 customizable group training programs. Wow. Okay. We partner with more than 250 organizations. Wow. And while we love Charlotte, we've also delivered programs across North Carolina and in 26 states so far. Wow. And events like today remind us that the future of North Carolina isn't just about economics, it's about people and how we prepare them to lead, innovate, and thrive. UNC Charlotte's Corporate Training and Executive Education works with organizations to build stronger leaders and stronger businesses. Our programs cover leadership, communication, data, AI, and professional skills. These aren't just lectures, they're practical, engaging, and designed around the real challenges professionals face every day. And the timing couldn't be better, because North Carolina continues to be ranked among the best states for business. Companies here need talent ready to step into leadership roles, manage change, and drive results. Corporate training and executive education is here to help. If you're looking for ways to strengthen your teams and invest in your people, we'd love to connect. I'm excited to hear about today's presentation and join you in an update on our state's economy and future ahead. So thank you, enjoy the event. And one last number, go 49ers! Woo! Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lauren. We really appreciate the support. When I say support, they're providing funding for this event that includes funding for the lunch out there. So really, we should give them a real thank you for the lunch. We appreciate that. So the Du Bois Center at UNC Charlotte, in addition to being the home for UNC Charlotte's corporate training and executive education unit, is also the home base for our Belk College of Business graduate programs. We offer a variety of part-time programs for working professionals and executives, including our nationally ranked Charlotte MBA program, featuring both in-person and online options. Now, to the main event we're all here for, our presentation. We will have a question and answer period with our hybrid audience as well following today's presentations. If you're in the hybrid audience, please submit your questions via the Zoom chat at any time. We'll have people with microphones running around the room for folks that are here in person. So it's my pleasure now to introduce you to my colleague and friend, Dr. John Connaughton, Professor of Economics in the Belk College. For over 40 years, John has been interpreting the data and sharing his expertise on where North Carolina's economy has been and where it's going next. So with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Connaughton.
Good afternoon. This is going to be an interesting quarter. It's been an interesting year in economics, and I think that the rest of the year is going to be even more, I don't want to say exciting, but more intriguing. Yeah, a lot of things going on. So let's begin. What we're going to talk about today is obviously 2025 GDP and employment review. In addition to that, we're also going to take a look at, a lot of people are wondering, are we still going to see inflation for the remainder of this year and into 26? Is an economic slowdown on a horizon? We've had some rather weak employment numbers recently and some other things. Weekly initial job claims were a little high last week. Or are we looking potentially at a recession? And a lot's going to happen because today and tomorrow the Fed meets, and of course everybody's curious as to what they're going to do. They have a dual mandate, and so on the one hand they've got to keep eye on inflation, but on the other hand they've got to maintain full employment, and they're kind of in that position where neither of those numbers right now are looking great. So which one do you essentially look as the most important? So we'll talk about that. And then finally, we'll give an update or an outlook on 2026 GDP, employment, and unemployment. Okay? So let's begin. All right. So like the U.S. had a negative first quarter. North Carolina didn't have a negative first quarter. It had a rather slow growth first quarter at 0.8%. Second quarter picked up like in the U.S., but not as much as the U.S. So it didn't drop as much in the first quarter as the U.S. did, and a lot of what caused the U.S. to drop was essentially getting ahead of the curve on the tariffs, which popped up in April. So in the first quarter of the year, there was a lot of front loading in terms of buying imports in order to be ready for what was a very unknown second quarter. Because of the makeup of our economy, we weren't in that position as much as a lot of other parts of the country were. And so we didn't have the big drop that was brought about nationally by a big imbalance in exports and imports. We didn't have that situation. There was a rebound in the second quarter when that changed nationally. Again, because we weren't affected as much, our second quarter didn't rebound as much. But overall, if you look at it, we're still looking at 2.3% growth for the year. That's probably in line with what's going on nationally. And 2.3% in today's world is actually fairly normal, okay? Some of you, I'm looking here, some of you old enough to remember 3 and 4% growth is kind of a normal item, but that's not the case anymore given the demographics in the country and a few other things. So 2.5% is really kind of the max that you can expect, and we're right in line with that for 2025 when all the data come in later in the year. On a sector-by-sector basis, you'll notice that 11 of the 15 economic sectors are showing growth. Information, which is a small sector, only accounts for a little less than 5% of the economy, is kind of leading the way. I don't worry about agriculture up here because it's such a small part of the economy, and certainly not something that is in the metro areas, which tend to drive most of the economic growth of the state. Information is big, but what's kind of a surprise is our retail trade being up by 3.1%. Again, a lot of front running in this as a result of tariffs and people stocking up on a lot of things. So we're seeing that. On a more concerning note, what we see here is government at 2.8% growth. And that just seems to click along, no matter what we say that the size of the government ought to be. It still typically exceeds the state overall level of growth. Now, for those of you that haven't seen a chart like this before, first-time attendees, let me give you a quick rundown of how to interpret this. The horizontal axis is the growth of each of these economic sectors. And by the way, H&L stands for hospitality and leisure. E and H stands for education and health services, and that's business and professional services. And fire has got nothing to do with red trucks or anything like that. It's finance, insurance, and real estate. So anyway, horizontal sector, those are simply growth rates. This vertical axis right here is essentially a pie chart, and it tells you what percentage each of these sectors make up of overall growth. And you can see the big one is finance, insurance, and real estate, 21%. And that's really, it's that and business and professional services, make up over a third of the state's economy. Now, what's interesting is that you put those two together, growth rate and percent of total output, and very quickly you can see that the size of these rectangles indicate how important each sector's activity is to the overall growth rate in the state. Big rectangles, they are the drivers of the economy, okay? And you can see that it's all down here in finance, insurance, and real estate, business and professional services, educational and health services, and government. That's where all the growth is coming from in the state. And if we did this, and some of you were here last year, we took a look back into the early 1980s in terms of how the state's structure was put together, and over a third of the state's output was from manufacturing. And you can see today that durable and non-durables, make up about 13% of GDP, much smaller than it used to be, okay? All right, on the employment side, we expect 76,400 jobs to be added this year. And that's actually pretty good, okay? Kind of the maximum you'd ever expect to see is 100,000. So 76 is a pretty good number. So we're generating jobs out of that economic growth that we expect in this year. Again, the big sectors here, you'll notice one of the ones I always want to point out, remember finance, insurance, and real estate was 21% of output, but it's only 6% of jobs. It's a very high productivity sector, and as a result, high paying, obviously, but it doesn't account for a lot of jobs. Hospitality and leisure services are like 4% of output, but they account for almost 11% of jobs. So you can see the growth rate here. Again, there are 14 sectors here, agriculture is not included, and 11 of these 14, again, are expected to show growth in job creation this year. All right, so next question everybody's asking, inflation, slowdown, recession, what's going on here? All right, so just to update you in terms of the inflation and what's been going on, these are year-over-year inflation numbers, monthly inflation numbers for the consumer price index in blue, consumer price core, which is the CPI overall minus energy and it's minus energy and agriculture, okay, food. I don't know why brain fade there, but yeah, energy and food. All right, again, the idea being that those are very, very hard for the Fed to control. All right, so we can see the spike up here at 9.1% in 22. We see that, just bam. And then the Fed started to get somewhat serious in and around here. And you can see that they started raising federal funds rate, which is here in gray. And what's happened is, if you take a look at the last year or so, we have driven down CPI and CPI core, but it's gotten very sticky, okay? It's been hanging in low 3 to a high 2% rate. Again, the target is really 0 to 2%. Ideally, 1 to 2% is what I'd like to see on inflation. And yet, we've been stuck really for the last year at low 3, high 2s, both in terms of the core and the overall CPI, with a little bit of, we saw some decline early in this year, down below 2%, down below 3%, but we've seen a little climb back. What we're probably looking at right now is inflation, less the tariff issue, probably in the middle 2 range, maybe the low 2 range. But tariffs have had a little bit of impact. If you've been coming to these for the last couple of quarters, remember I'm saying that we don't really expect there to be a big impact of tariffs on inflation, but that doesn't mean zero. And so what we're seeing probably right now is a slight impact, which is, again, making the Fed's job a lot more difficult. But the consensus on tariffs is that its impact on inflation is going to be a one-time deal. It should be gone away or removed from the economy by the end of this year when all the dust settles. How many people here drink coffee? What's happened to coffee prices at the supermarket recently? Not just up, but up, okay? My wife was complaining yesterday. She went into Harris Teeter, and the coffee she buys, which is Peet's, I don't know if anybody is familiar with that brand, it used to be $11 and $12 for a package. It's now $15 or $16. Big increase. My point being that at the same time, some imports are seeing tremendous price increases. Others are seeing none whatsoever. And as I said earlier in this year at some of these briefings, the effect of tariffs on prices that we see is entirely dependent on the relative elasticities in that little market. And most of us have grown up and we are addicted to coffee. Raise your hands, please. Okay, yes, we've got that. And therefore, it's very inelastic demand, and they can pass the tariffs completely. Plus, there's been some weather issues in some of the areas where coffee has grown, but they can pass that on pretty easily, whereas in some other things, it's much more difficult to pass it on. All right, so here's our monthly job growth, and of course, we're all concerned about the weakness in the labor market over the summertime, okay? And for those that are real Fed watches, just keep in mind that it was this drop right here, June, July, and August, that generated the Fed drop in the federal funds rate last year at this time in their September meeting, where they started with a big 50 basis points drop and then subsequently 225 basis points. So I'll be interested to see what they do right now, because clearly the labor market is weaker. On the one hand, you can say that. On the other, you can say there seems to be, if you look at the data way over time, there seems to be a problem with their seasonal adjustment process around this time of year. And so it's not clear that the markets are the labor market is quite as weak as we might otherwise see from these numbers. Here's, again, North Carolina numbers. And, we had a drop of 1,500 in July, which was strange. But again, my belief in it is that we're dealing with a little bit of funky seasonal adjustment program, both nationally and at the state level as well. All right, so U.S. and North Carolina unemployment, as you can see, this is through, on our case, July, U.S. August. We've been consistently below federal unemployment rate, the U.S. unemployment rate. One of the things that I'm a little bit concerned about, and you've heard this when it relates to establishment employment and the accuracy of these numbers, because they don't get as many surveys returned as they used to. Companies just don't return the surveys. And so they've got a much smaller survey, and that increases the variability in the numbers they generate. With this, they are still survey, but that's not where the problem is. But I'm always concerned when I just see for 6 months in a row, the same number coming out. Just saying one thing, okay? Here is kind of a look at U.S. and North Carolina GDP. We tend to perform, until just recently, a little bit better than the U.S. on a quarter in, quarter out basis. All right, so here we go. U.S. trade deficit. Everybody worries about tariffs, and a lot of people say it's just not right, and so on and so forth. Neither is a $1 trillion trade deficit. And as recently as 2018, 2019, before COVID, it was $600 billion. People weren't getting excited about that, okay? And in, $30+ trillion economy, $600 billion is not real money, okay? But when we start to push $1 trillion, it starts to become problematic. And we've seen, as you can see, from COVID on, it's just been incredible, the level of increase in the U.S. trade deficit. Because the GDP, and if you think about it in terms of the consumption plus investment plus government expenditures on goods and services, not social programs, but expenditures on goods and services, plus exports minus imports. Consumption, the first one, which is what we do, is 70% of GDP. So this is an example of if consumers are happy, the economy is happy. And we've seen kind of in the last year or so, we've seen a drop in consumer confidence, but just recently we've seen a little bit of a pickup, okay? But again, 60 is far below normal, which I think is 90 on this index number. And so, we're not a whole lot off from where we were in the Great Recession in terms of consumer confidence. So something to think about. All right, however, personal consumption expenditures, they just keep bumping along, except for COVID right here. And they're still, you can see at the end of this, it's still going up. So consumers, and we got a retail sales number this morning. I didn't have time to put it in, but it was up, I think, 0.6% month to month. So that's pretty good. People are still spending and still buying. That 0.6 was less autos, okay? All right, so recent recessions. It's always good to take a look at where we've been recently. And here's kind of a look at the recessions. Going all the way back to 74, 75, we've got the cause of those and the length of them. And as you can see, we had two really good ones prior to this Great Recession of 2007, 2009. The 74, 75 recession was caused by the oil embargo of OPEC. And at that time, we were only producing about 40% of our demand. So it was we really relied on imports of oil. Today, that's much, much less, all right? Collapse of the Bretton Woods framework. For those of you that don't know, that was in 1944, and it basically set up the fixed exchange rates between countries and the way international payments took place. The U.S. dollar pegged at $35. You're going to love this. $35 an ounce of gold. $35 an ounce of gold. What's gold price now? Yeah, about $3,700. Just saying, all right? But it collapsed because Nixon took us off the gold standard. And it was following a year and a half or so of price controls in the United States. First price freeze, then price controls, and then price guidelines in that order. 1980 was tight monetary policy, trying to get rid of the inflation that existed during the 70s, where we had 3 years during the 1970s where the annual inflation rate was over 10% in each of those years. Again, the really severe one, 81, 82, again, tight monetary policy. 90 and 91, we had tight monetary policy in Gulf War. Is there a theme here? Energy and tight monetary policy? All right. 2001 was its own unique dot-com bubble. And then in 2007-9, we had the subprime mortgage collapse, in which point it was essentially an old-time panic, economic panic. They used to call recessions panics back in the 19th century because they were panics because we had no central bank and no real monetary policy. And so frequently banks would go under and there would be no lending available. And then COVID-19, which is a really short one, just 2 months. Now, if we take a look at average recession and expansion lengths, this is always a troublesome chart. Up until the formation of the Fed, basically up to 1919 through the First World War, contractions lasted almost 22 months, and expansions lasted just under 27 months. So in a 4-year cycle, you'd have an expansion and then a contraction, an expansion and a contraction. Can you imagine living through that? Between 1919 and 1945, we basically doubled the length of expansions compared to contractions, but they're still a year and a half, 2 years long. Since 1945 through the COVID, contractions are very small, less than a year, and expansions are running 5, 6 years on average length. So despite all the criticism of the Federal Reserve, we have to understand, are they perfect? No. Are things a lot better today than they were 50 years ago, 100 years ago? Yeah, the Fed's gotten pretty good at what they do. Enough said. All right, so what is a recession, by the way? And everybody thinks it's 2 quarters, consecutive 2 quarters decline in real GDP. And that's not the definition. That's sort of a rule of thumb. Usually that happens, you have a recession. We had that in 22, and we had no recession. We had 2 consecutive quarters of decline in real GDP. What the NBER, which are the keepers of that business cycle, this stuff here, and the deciders, using a word from George Bush, the deciders of when a recession happens or doesn't happen, they say it's a significant decline in economic activity that is spread across the economy and lasts more than a few months. But it is not based on a rigid numerical formula. Instead, a committee of experts evaluates depth, diffusion, and duration. And they use 6 monthly indicators to come to that conclusion. All right, so the one everybody wants to know, tomorrow at noon, what's the Fed going to do? Okay, they're meeting right now, just as we're here. They're sitting there scratching their heads, looking at their crystal balls. All right, so the last 4 years, we have focused on the Fed and their monetary policy as it relates to trying to curb inflation. But in the last 6 months, tariffs, trade wars, or tariffs and trade have replaced the focus on the Fed. So they've kind of gone under the radar, and we've been mostly saying, what are these crazy tariffs going to do to the economy? But now we're at a case where we had that bad, weak employment numbers. So will an economic slowdown change the focus? Will we start paying attention to tariffs and trade and start taking a look at employment and unemployment and make some decisions? So again, here's that same chart again in terms of what's going on with inflation. Right now we're sitting in terms of core at 3.1% and overall at 2.9%. As I've said for the last year, has been very, very sticky, okay? But, and you've seen this graph before, this picture before. No one in here really talks about the 800-pound gorilla in the room right now as the Fed is making decisions. So what is that 800-pound gorilla? Long story short, since 2022, the Fed, which for the first 110 years of its existence, year in, year out, made money. And because they're a quasi-governmental agency, they actually don't have a budget line in the federal budget. They cover all their expenses and they make money. And then they return that excess to the Treasury year in, year out, without a break. Pretty good, huh? Except the last 3 years, they're pushing close to $250 billion in losses, principally because of a policy they put into effect back early in this decade, as a result of the 2007-09 recession, and that's called interest on reserves. So if banks have reserves being held at the Federal Reserve Bank, okay, Federal Reserve Bank pays them interest. The interest that they pay is pegged at 25 basis points over the federal funds rate. So the federal funds rate right now is 4.33%, okay? They're paying 25 basis points over that, or essentially 4.6% on the excess reserves. Yet their portfolio, their $7 trillion balance sheet, made up mostly of U.S. Treasuries, which were bought to support deficit spending during the Great Recession and afterwards to accommodate the Treasury debt that was taking place. It's paying 2.5%. Now, if you're earning 2.5%, and paying 4.5%, you can see that you're losing money every time you write that check. And that's where the cumulative $250 billion comes from. So, we've got the meeting today and tomorrow. We got 2 more meetings this year and then one in early 26. How many rate cuts, all right? So again, let's look at the monthly job growth numbers. Not real good recently. Last year, well, let me go back to this chart. So this is where we were last summer. Fed got nervous. We're kind of thinking, all right, we've got to go ahead and make sure that we have a soft landing. All right, that's very important to us. We don't want to curb inflation and create a recession at the same time. So they immediately, in September last year, dropped the federal funds rate 50 basis points and then subsequently 2 following 25 basis point drops. The problem is that they went from 5.33 average rate down to 4.33 in a very short period of time. But the 10-year Treasury, and that was 100 basis points, by the way, the 10-year Treasury went up about 90 basis points during the same period of time. Why? We call it the bond vigilantes, but the reality is the market said, the Fed's given up on inflation, therefore rates have to go up to compensate for unexpected inflation for investors. The question is right now, what are we going to do, okay? I told you the other day that, earlier in the thing, that last week we had quite a jump in weekly initial unemployment claims. This again is a concern. Weak jobs, unemployment rate rising slightly up to 4.3%, and then we get this number about weekly claims, initial weekly claims. That's a pretty significant jump early in September. All right, fixed mortgage is coming down from high 2 years ago, down to 6.35. Not great, but still a lot better than where it's been recently. So the Federal Reserve's dual mandate, promote maximum employment and stable prices. All right. However, failure to meet the 2 goals does not have equal consequences. So just think about it. If they fail to get the inflation rate down below 2%, we all pay a little price. On the other hand, when the unemployment rate goes up to 5 or 6%, okay, that's a few million people who lost their jobs. Okay, so the burden on a small number of people is very, very severe versus a small cost to a large number of people. So when you're weighing those two, that you can't dismiss that difference in burden. Okay, so we'll see what they do. So what's the decision options going forward? If you lower rates, you increase the likelihood of a soft landing. It reduces Fed losses because we're not having to pay out as much for the reserves. Increases inflation risk going forward, but it could send shockwaves to the market like it did last fall. On the other hand, if you keep rates at the current level, you do have a better shot at controlling inflation, but you're going to get a slowdown and possibly a recession, and you keep Fed losses high. But you do have more options, more tools in your kit, because you can then reduce it even more if things get really much worse. All right. So with that in mind, let's take one last thing. So how many people here think the Fed is not going to change interest rates tomorrow? I got 2. Okay, actually, this is good. How many people think they're going to go 25 basis points? Okay, how many people think they'll go 50? You know, you are representative of what the market is saying out there, because the latest number I saw from the CNBC survey this morning was about 96% think it's going to be 25 basis points. Nobody thinks it's 0, and about 4% think it might be 50 basis points. So that's really just about in line with what y'all thought, okay? Now that's what they think the Fed's going to do. Okay, that's a little different from what the Fed ought to do. I'm sitting here thinking, and by the way, tomorrow I'll be out of town, so you can't give me grief when the when the number comes up. But I think it's going to be 25 basis points. I think that's almost a certainty. I think if they don't, to quote a long time ago sitcom, they got some splaining to do. Okay. All right. So anyway, outlook for 26 looks like another 2% year of growth. You can tell by this that my guess is the Fed's going to lower rates this time and probably the next meeting as well. Maybe 50-50, one more reduction this year. All right, and I think that's going to be enough to keep the economy going. I think the economy, underlying the economy, despite all of the stuff that's been going on this last year, is still relatively strong, and consumers are relatively strong and continue to purchase. So I think we're going to see a little bit of weakness early in the year, but by the end of the year, I think the economy is going to be pretty strong. All right, and again, 2.1%. Where I'm looking basically for all the sectors to have growth during the year. I think the economy is going to be more normalized next year than it has been this year, with some ups and downs and stuff. And finally, on the employment side, 80,000 jobs next year. And that's a good year. That's a real good year for North Carolina, 80,000 jobs. And finally, last but not least, I do expect the unemployment rate to tick up so that by the end of this year, it'll be about 3.8% and probably about 4.1% by the end of 26. Okay, I think the U.S. rate will be probably higher, probably 4.3, 4.4 by the end of next year. But again, that's not really a big concern in terms of that level of unemployment. It's close to what we consider to be the benchmark for full employment. But it's certainly not something where you had peak rates. A couple of those recessions, we had peak rates that exceeded 10%. So I think it's a lot different. So I think overall, if we look at this, we've got some takeaways. These are things to pay attention to. Obviously, I think the biggest one is Fed rate cuts. Right now, energy is not an issue, and we've seen that OPEC Plus is looking to increase oil output in the fall. And so I think energy should be fine. But as we all know, if things blow up in the Mideast, things could get a little crazy. U.S. monthly job growth comes out the first Friday of every month, 8:30. You should set up with the Labor Department so you get a little tickle on your phone so you can see what it is at 8:30 in the morning. September inflation is October 15th, again, 8:30. Very big number. The FOMC meeting today and tomorrow. Fiscal year 2026 budget is a wild card right now. Technically, they've got, 15 days left? Yeah, 15 days left. No. Okay, and second quarter GDP comes out at the end of October, and that's a big number, all right? So key takeaways. Exogenous shocks matter, energy, monetary policy, trade wars and tariffs. As long as they continue to bubble down, I don't think they're going to be a big issue, but you never know, right? You never know. Fed policy matters. I think there's a 60-40 return of inflation in 25, and we're starting to see that now. And finally, so 30% chance, okay, of a little bit of a slowdown, 60% chance of no slowdown in the economy going forward through 26, and an actual 10% that what I've suggested is will underestimate the growth. It could take off. There is that just a slight chance. But I'm going with right here, no slowdown, no recession. Okay? So that's actually good news, right? All right? So what do they say about economy? No. It's not really necessarily always the dismal science. So I think things are in pretty good shape. I think the appropriate move of the Fed is at 25 basis points. I think probably another 25 for the rest of the year, not necessarily 75. I don't know how many of you I'm sorry, I got to keep going. I don't know how many of you are familiar with something called the Taylor Rule. It was developed by John Taylor, economist, at Stanford about 30 years ago. And it's kind of a little formula that plugs in unemployment, plugs in job growth, it plugs in a bunch of things, and it comes up with the federal funds rate as it should be. And guess what? It's right about 4.3% right now. So if you do the current Taylor Rule calculation, the Fed's where it needs to be. But that didn't include the August employment number. So, we'll see what happens going forward. All right, thank you very much, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that any of you had. Richard? All right, Richard, rock and roll.
Thank you, John. We appreciate that. And so Lynn will bring us some comments from cyberspace in a few minutes, but let's start with here in the room. Are there any questions for John?
The labor numbers that you show, do they reflect
Okay, great question, okay? Just quick, the labor numbers, do they reflect the big revision that was announced recently? It was what, 900,000 jobs, 900-something thousand jobs? The benchmarking. Real quick, let me answer how this works. So this, again, is a survey. And it comes out, the first Friday of the following month. So the August numbers came out the first Friday in September. So it's quick, all right? And, it's usually fairly good, but that's the number we run with. Every year, they go back and they benchmark it against the quarterly earnings numbers, which are part of every state's unemployment insurance data collection. And so we go from a 30% survey, roughly, which is even less than that now because people aren't turning it in, to about a 95% survey, essentially almost population numbers. But the problem with those numbers is they show up 2 quarters after. So they're not very good at gauging what's going on now, and we want that. Okay, so this summer, I think about a month ago, they announced that based on the quarterly surveys, all right, the March number in total employment was probably overestimated by about 900,000 jobs. Now this is in, 150 million jobs total, something like that, all right? So the answer to your question real quick is no, these are still the old numbers. They haven't been benchmarked. That takes place in February. So in February, they'll redo all the monthly numbers. They expect it to be about, based on last March's overestimate, about 900,000 jobs. Last year, the same announcement was 845,000 jobs, I believe, overestimated for March of 24. When the full benchmark came in February, it was only about 600,000 was the how much they were off. That's 600. It seems like, oh God, that's a lot of jobs. 600,000 in 150 million. Yeah. So yeah, but good question. Yes, sir.
So just related to that theme there, regardless of the adjustments, I guess my question is, are the employment numbers still telling us what they used to tell us, right? Because you have these issues with either people adding to the labor force, getting out of the labor force. Break-even employment used to be 150, now it's around 75, 50, or...
Yeah, who knows, right? Okay, so let me tell you where the problem is that has raised concerns around these monthly, very almost like flash estimates of employment. And it has to do with a survey. So about 30% of it's done at establishments of various sizes. And historically, the survey accounted for about 30% of employment, all right? The problem is, and it's voluntary, the problem is companies are just, they don't really care. And so the surveys are coming in light compared to where they were, say, 10 years ago. And so, there's a lot of information they're not getting. And as it turns out, the bias is they're not doing too badly in large 50-plus employer establishments. It's the small ones that don't seem to care whether they turn the survey in. And so they either turn it in late or not at all. And that's what's generating the problem. And the rate at which the turn-ins are slowing down is essentially getting worse. And that's what's causing the problem. If you've ever done any statistical extrapolation, you understand that if the survey is smaller, remember those confidence bands? They get wider and wider and wider as you go out in time. So that's where they're running into a problem. That's really what the issue is. I think there's also a problem with the consistent using of a certain seasonal adjustment process that may not be as accurate today as it was, say, 10, 15 years ago. All right, but that's really where the issue is.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
John, let's take one from cyberspace,
Okay.
and we'll come back just to make sure we get ready. So here's a question. Why wouldn't the increase in the Consumer Price Index during summer 2025 justify a federal funds rate increase?
Okay.
I figure that'd be a one you'd like.
Yes, absolutely. So first of all, I said I think it's going to be 25 basis points. If I were the chair of the Federal Reserve System, actually, yeah, I would not raise rates. Okay? I think that answers the question. I don't see, at this point in time, an absolute necessity. And the reason I say that is we saw employment numbers drop last year. We know that we're not as confident in those numbers, not for political reasons, just because of statistical reasons. We're not as confident in those numbers as we used to be. And last year, after the drop in employment numbers, we saw them spike back up again in late fall. Okay? I'm kind of like from Missouri, show me. Maybe this isn't the time to drop interest rates, because once you drop them, okay, you can't really raise them without ensuing panic. Think about it. They drop rates, say they do it again in October, and they're down 50 basis points from where they are now, and then all of a sudden, employment market's fine, unemployment drops down to 4.1%. I mean, and the inflation rate shoots up to over 3%. And you say, well, what are we going to do? You raise rates, and all of a sudden, what? You send a shiver into the economy, and they get concerned about that. So I'm like, I don't see anything right now that says we got to drop rates. I mean, if you look, has anybody paid any attention to the CapEx taking place this year? It's off the charts. Okay? That's got to mean the cost of money is not a problem. So it's availability, plenty of it available. You just have to pay for it. But you've got such economic potential that paying for it is not a problem right now. Okay, your turn.
So I'm going to go back to labor numbers just for a minute. I know that we had a lot of jobs that were government jobs, civic jobs that were changed during the spring, and they may be included in the survey. A lot of those people went on admin leave, which will end September 30th. So have those numbers what are those numbers? Number one, do we know them? And number two, has that hit this number yet?
Okay, number one, answer the first question, who knows? Okay, answer to the second question, there's a speculation that some of what we're seeing is government employment driven that way. Okay, and so that's one of the reasons why I'm less concerned with those numbers than I would otherwise be. I mean, there are a lot of questions as to, well, how bad are those numbers we've just seen in the last couple of months? It could be seasonal adjustment problem. It could be survey problem. It could be that some of these folks are now collecting unemployment insurance that were laid off by DOJ.
But they wouldn't be, because most of them are on admin leave until September 30th.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So that would be where there might be some flaws.
Those were the voluntary ones, not the ones that got axed. Mm-hmm. Okay, so yeah, there are two groups out there. There are two groups out there. There's the voluntary group, which were given essentially buyouts, which don't take place was 6 months. But there are a stream of them over time that have been axed, who've been basically laid off. Okay, and we don't know. We really can't divine out how much they're affecting the employment numbers.
But it could affect it.
But they certainly
30th.
could, yeah, no question about that.
Let's do another from
Cyber question.
Yes, this is one that I think you like. For the long-term health and success of the United States, is it better to have a strong overall economy or a strong stock market?
Oh, that's easy. Strong overall economy, okay? The stock market is certainly important, and there is this thing called the wealth effect, and that is as your wealth rises, you find it necessary to cut savings because you don't need to save as much out of your current income, and you can spend. So certainly the stock market, and because how many people here got 401ks? I should ask how many don't. But anyway, the wealth effect, as you see your 401k rise and rise and rise and rise year in and year out, you say, well, maybe I don't have to put as much money in that, so now I can consume more. So to that extent, certainly the stock market matters in terms of making sure consumers feel comfortable spending money on goods and services. But overall, the economists delve in the real economy, as we call it, which is C plus I plus G plus X minus M. And as a result of that, we spend less time worrying about the stock market. Although it is an indicator of the healthy economy, but it's not necessarily, if you've got a good stock market, but you've got 9% unemployment, it doesn't really matter, right? So yeah, the real economy matters the most. All right, we got a question way back there.
Yeah, given the proliferation of AI and automation, do you think Fed easing would have the same impact on the labor market that it once did?
That's an excellent, excellent question, and I have no idea. You stumped the band today, okay? I mean, you would think that possibly not. I think that would be, off the top of the head kind of an issue. But I don't know that we know enough about where AI is actually going to be effective. I know that everybody that has any kind of search engine now, first thing that pops up is the AI answer to your question, right? Which is, instead of listing 6 or 7 sites to go to, first one is the AI answer. And that's really already looked at the top 6 or 7 and summarized them for you. Now, that helps. And we can talk about this later in terms of the veracity of that AI summation of the first 5 or 6 sites that you would visit on trying to answer that question. But I think in terms of, from a productivity standpoint, which is I think is where that question is going, we don't really know where AI is going to significantly improve productivity to the point where it's almost independent of every other potential issue, okay? I don't know. It's early on in the AI game. We're not going to know for a couple of years. One thing I do know, and that's part of the CapEx issue I raised earlier, one thing we do know, absolutely, is that investment in AI is what's going to drive this economy, whether we like it or not, for the next couple of years. And
Okay.
so, short term, it may not have a big effect on monetary policy, may not have a big effect given that.
So we've had great questions, but we're down to the final one. So we'll let it be from in room, unless.
Yes, sir.
I've heard whispers of the Fed wanting to reevaluate gold. You mentioned a little bit that gold is rising. I've also heard that it might feed to pay off some of the deficit. Do you have an opinion on that?
So we should repeat the question for the folks watching.
You repeat it, because maybe.
Okay, so I think your question was basically, you've heard rumors that the Fed may revalue gold, meaning potentially go back to a gold standard type of thing. And what would the effect on the economy be if that happened?
Okay, so first of all, I didn't bring that chart with me, okay? But when I teach money in banking, I've got that chart. And one of the interesting things that you see when you look at U.S. under gold standard is this incredible wild swing of inflation. Because remember, gold, if you're pegging gold, the dollar to gold, if you have a gold strike, all of a sudden you get a big influx of gold into the economy. Gold value goes down, and you know the rest of it, and all of a sudden prices. And on the other hand, when you're going along and you can't find any gold, you can't expend the money, and it tends to send you into recession, or more importantly, it sends you into a period of deflation. Not disinflation, but deflation, where actually prices come down. So consequently, historically, the Fed's management of monetary policy and to some extent their ability to control money supply has been more stable over time than when we were on the gold standard. So I get people's feeling about taking it out of the hands of humans, okay? But I think it's very unlikely that we would ever go back on the gold standard. And as a result of that, I wouldn't get too concerned about it. But it's I guess we all have a little Rand Paul in us, okay? And so, but I don't think there's any chance of that happening. All right. I want to thank you very, very much. And our next quarterly briefing is in December. Do you know what?
In about a quarter.
Be in about a quarter.
I don't know the exact date.
Yeah, it's 15th, 16th of December, something like that. I think it's tentatively set. I don't think it's confirmed yet, so maybe I should shut up.
So, thank you, John.
Oh,
We
thank
appreciate
you.
it.
There, you have the official machine back. Thank you very much.
And thank you all for being here today. If your firm would like to engage further with the Belk College of Business, which I am going to point out as of this semester, is the largest business school in the state of North Carolina. Our mission is to produce the talent, expertise, and impactful research to fuel economic growth in the Charlotte region. So please reach out. We are eager to partner with you. So that concludes our program today. Go Niners. Come watch us beat Rice on Thursday. We'll see you next time.